The hunger had teeth. It gnawed at my belly as I stood at the kitchen window, watching ice crystals form patterns on glass so thin I could punch through it with my fist. The cold seeped through the frame like whispered warnings, and I pressed my forehead against the pane until the chill bit into my skin. Outside, Chicago's wind screamed between the tenement buildings like a wounded animal, carrying the scent of coal smoke and somebody else's Sunday dinner. Roast chicken and cornbread that might as well have been dreams for all the good they did me. Somewhere in that howl, I heard my own desperation echoing back, raw and shameless. The radiator coughed and wheezed behind me, putting out about as much heat as a dying candle. 3 months since the gas company had threatened to shut us off, and I'd been stretching our meager supply like Sunday communion wine. A little bit to last us through eternity, if eternity meant making it to next week. "Mama?" Viola's voice cracked behind me, small and uncertain. At 8, my youngest had learned to read the language of empty cupboards and unpaid bills written in the lines around my eyes. Children shouldn't have to learn such things so young, but poverty was a harsh teacher that didn't care about childhood innocence. I counted to 3 before turning from the window, using those precious seconds to arrange my face into something that might pass for strength. The mask felt heavy, but I'd been wearing it so long it had become part of my skin. "What is it, baby girl?" She held up a doll made from corn husks and scraps of fabric, one of the few toys that survived our move from the house on Ashland Avenue to this cramped apartment above Murphy's corner store. The house had been Samuel's pride, with its front porch and postage stamp yard where he'd planted tomatoes every spring. Now we lived stacked on top of one another like canned goods, breathing each other's sighs and sharing each other's nightmares. The doll's yarn hair had come loose, hanging in sad tangles around its painted face. Someone, probably Charlotte during one of her restless nights, had tried to re-braid it, but tiny fingers weren't gentle enough for such delicate work. "Can you fix her, please?" My hands, already cracked from the lye soap I used for washing other people's clothes, trembled as I took the doll. The washing brought in maybe $3 a week when I was lucky. Mrs. Henderson on State Street paid 50 cents for her family's weekly laundry, and Mrs. O'Malley gave me 35 cents plus leftover bread that was only a little stale. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was what kept us from the poorhouse. 3 months since Samuel died in that factory accident, crushed under machinery that should have been retired years ago. The foreman had handed me $27.43, Samuel's final pay, and told me he was sorry for my loss like those words could fill the hole in our lives. 3 months, and still my fingers shook when the girls looked at me like I held all the answers in the world. "Course I can fix her," I whispered, though I wasn't sure I could fix anything anymore. Some things stayed broken no matter how much love you poured into them. The apartment smelled of cabbage and coal smoke, the perfume of poverty that clung to everything we owned. I'd boiled the same cabbage 3 times this week, adding water and salt until it was more memory than substance. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Kowalski next door arguing with her husband in Polish, their voices rising and falling like a familiar song of frustration I understood in any language. The Kowalskis had been in America longer than us, but America hadn't been any kinder to them. Below us, Murphy's cash register rang with the sound of money I didn't have. Ching, 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 like a church bell mocking my empty pockets. Murphy was decent enough, letting me buy on credit when times were desperate, but decent only stretched so far when you had your own family to feed. I settled into the wooden chair by the kitchen table, the one Samuel had made before everything went to hell. His hands had shaped every curve, sanded every surface until it was smooth as silk. He'd carved our initials in the underside where only we would know they existed. My fingers traced those letters now, worn smooth by months of anxious touching. I reached for my sewing basket, a wedding gift from Samuel's mother that had seen better days. The wicker was fraying, held together by determination and prayer, but it still held my needles and thread, my small tools for keeping our world from completely unraveling. "Tell me about the magic book again," Viola said, climbing onto my lap despite being too big for such things. Her weight pressed against my chest, warm and real and more precious than air. She smelled like the lavender soap we'd gotten from the church charity box, mixed with the particular scent of child, innocence and possibility, and trust so complete it made my heart ache. "What magic book?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. These rituals between us had become sacred, repeated conversations that offered comfort in their familiarity. "The one where the lady makes food appear when there's nothing left. The one where everything turns out okay." I'd been telling my girls stories since they were babies. Stories my own mama had told me about women who could make something from nothing, who could stretch a single fish to feed a multitude. Stories I made up when the real world got too sharp around the edges, when bill collectors knocked too loud and landlords demanded too much. But lately, those stories felt like lies, pretty decorations on an ugly truth. "That's just make-believe, baby. But you said magic was real if you believed hard enough." Her voice carried that particular stubbornness that reminded me of Samuel, the way he'd argued with the factory foreman about safety conditions right up until the day the machines proved him right. I tied off the yarn and handed the doll back to her, smoothing down the freshly braided hair. "Some things we believe because we need to, not because they're true." Viola frowned, studying the doll's repaired face with the intensity she brought to everything: puzzles, prayers, problems too big for little girls to solve. She looked sad now. Before I could answer, footsteps thundered up the stairs outside our door. Heavy, deliberate steps that made my stomach clench like a fist around emptiness. I knew that walk. Our landlord, coming to collect rent I didn't have. His footsteps always sounded angry, even when he was in a good mood, which wasn't often where tenants like us were concerned. His knock rattled our thin door hard enough to shake dust from the frame. "Mrs. Washington, I know you're in there." I lifted Viola from my lap, my hands steadier now that I had something to protect. "Go to your sister's. Close the bedroom door." She nodded, clutching her doll, and disappeared down the narrow hallway that connected our small world. I heard the bedroom door click shut, then Pearl's voice, low and soothing, probably gathering the younger girls around her like a mother hen protecting her chicks. At 15, Pearl had taken on responsibilities no child should carry, but she bore them with a grace that reminded me of my own mother. The knocking came again, harder this time, urgent and impatient. "Mrs. Washington." I straightened my shoulders, pulled my shawl tight around my chest, and opened the door just wide enough to see my landlord's face. Red from the cold and from the anger that seemed to live permanently in his features, he looked like a man who'd forgotten how to smile. His breath came out in white puffs, mixing with the scent of whiskey and cigarettes, the cologne of men who'd given up on dreams. "Rent's 3 weeks late," he said without preamble. No greeting, no acknowledgement that I was a human being worthy of basic courtesy. "I know. I've been working extra, washing for the Morrison family now, and Mrs. Green said she might need help with her sewing." "I don't want to hear your sob story." He pushed past me into the apartment, his muddy boots leaving tracks on the floor I'd scrubbed that morning with water so cold it made my joints ache. His eyes scanned our few possessions like a hawk searching for prey, calculating what might be worth something to someone else. "You got till Friday, or you're out." Friday. 3 days. 72 hours to find $18 I didn't have and probably never would. "Mr. Castellano, please. My husband died." "Your husband's been dead 3 months. Time to stop using him as an excuse. His gaze landed on Samuel's tools in the corner, his hammer with the worn wooden handle, his level that still held true, his measuring tape that had helped him build half the shelves in this neighborhood. Tools that once built hope, now gathering dust like broken promises. Sell something. Find the money. I don't care how. The words hit me like physical blows. Samuel's tools were more than wood and metal. They were his legacy, the proof that he'd existed, that he'd created something with his hands. But children needed shelter more than they needed symbols. Those tools, they're all I have left of him. Castellano shrugged, already moving toward the door. Then I guess you better decide what matters more. Dead man's tools or keeping your children warm. After he left, I stood in the center of our small living room, surrounded by the sound of my daughter's whispered voices through the bedroom door. The late afternoon light filtering through our windows had turned gray and weak, matching the hope in my chest. Winter light in Chicago was particularly cruel, promising nothing and delivering less. I walked to Samuel's toolbox and ran my fingers over the worn leather handle. He'd carried it to work every morning for 12 years, whistling gospel songs that filled our old house with music. Wade in the water when he was feeling philosophical. Swing low, sweet chariot when he missed his mother. Amazing grace when the world got too heavy. Now the silence pressed against my eardrums like water, threatening to drown me in memories. That's when I saw it. Tucked behind the toolbox, wedged between the wall and the radiator where the shadows gathered thick as secrets, lay a bundle wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. I'd cleaned this corner 100 times since we'd moved in, swept away dust and dead bugs and the debris of other people's lives, but I'd never seen this package before. Something about it called to me. The way lighthouse beams call to ships lost in fog, irresistible and necessary. My hands shook as I pulled it free, careful not to disturb whatever magic might be sleeping inside. The paper crackled, old and brittle as autumn leaves, and underneath I found a leather-bound book. Its cover was worn smooth as river stones, the color of dark honey, aged to a patina that spoke of years and wisdom and hands that had loved it well. Gold lettering flickered across the front, though some letters had faded with time and handling. The sacred recipes of something illegible. Hope. The missing words made the title feel like a riddle waiting to be solved. I opened it carefully, the way you'd handle butterfly wings or newborn dreams. The pages smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, of Sunday mornings and birthday cakes, of all the things we used to afford when Samuel's paycheck came regular and the world made sense. The scent was so rich, so real, that for a moment I forgot where I was. Forgot the empty cupboards and the angry landlord and the impossible weight of keeping 4 children alive on love and stubbornness. The first page contained an inscription written in faded purple ink, the script flowing and elegant like water. For the woman who feeds others even when she herself is hungry, magic lives not in the recipe, but in the love that stirs the pot. Below that, someone had written, "From Grandmother Ezra with all my love." Grandmother Ezra. The name stirred something in my memory. A half-remembered story Samuel's mother had told me years ago about her grandmother. A woman who could make miracles from scraps, who never let anyone leave her table hungry. But Samuel's mother had been gone 5 years now, and Samuel's grandmother even longer. How had this book found its way to me? I flipped through the pages, finding recipes written in the same purple ink, the handwriting confident and sure. But these weren't ordinary recipes like the ones in my mother's cookbook or the ladies' home journal. Alongside ingredients like flour and sugar, the instructions called for things like 2 handfuls of hope, a pinch of faith, and enough love to fill an empty heart. Each recipe was accompanied by small notes in the margins, observations and encouragements written in different hands, as if the book had passed from woman to woman, each adding her own wisdom. Remember to sing while you stir. Food tastes better with music. Never cook angry. The bitterness will poison the pot. Share even when you have little. The Lord multiplies what is given freely. Foolishness. That's what Samuel would have called it. My practical husband who believed in hard work and honest wages, who'd have laughed at recipes that called for abstract ingredients. But Samuel was gone, buried in Graceland Cemetery under a simple stone I'd scrimped and saved to afford, and foolishness was all I had left. The bedroom door creaked open, and Pearl emerged, her face carrying the weight of worries too heavy for 15-year-old shoulders. She'd grown thin since Samuel died, not from lack of food, but from the constant stress of being the oldest, of feeling responsible for holding our family together. Her dark eyes, so much like Samuel's, searched my face for signs of how bad things really were. Behind her came Iris, 13 and sharp as her name suggested, her mouth set in the perpetual frown she'd worn since we'd moved to this place. Iris felt everything too deeply, took every disappointment as a personal betrayal by the world. She'd been closest to Samuel, his little shadow who'd helped him with repairs around the house. And his death had turned her bright curiosity into suspicious anger. Charlotte followed, 11 and always ready to fight the world with her fists if necessary. Where Iris turned inward with her pain, Charlotte pushed outward, challenging anyone who dared suggest that our circumstances meant we were less than worthy. She'd already gotten into 2 fights at school this year, defending our family's honor with more passion than strategy. Little Viola brought up the rear, still clutching her repaired doll, her face hopeful in the way only 8-year-olds could manage. She alone seemed to believe that tomorrow might be better than today, that prayers were more than words whispered into empty air. "Mama?" Pearl's voice held the same careful tone she'd used since Samuel's funeral, as if speaking too loud might shatter what was left of our family. "Is everything okay?" I closed the book and pressed it against my chest, feeling warmth pulse beneath the leather cover like a living heartbeat. "We're going to be fine." "But the landlord—" Iris started, her voice sharp with the kind of anger that comes from feeling helpless. "Doesn't know what we're capable of," I finished, meeting each of their gazes in turn. None of them do. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Pearl sharing with Viola, Iris and Charlotte together in the other narrow bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the mysterious cookbook open before me. By the light of our single kerosene lamp, the pages seemed to glow with their own illumination, the purple ink dancing in the flickering shadows. I read the first recipe, bread of new beginnings. The ingredient list seemed simple enough: flour, water, salt, a bit of oil. But the instructions were unlike anything I'd seen in my mother's practical cookbook or the church recipe collections. Mix ingredients while thinking of 3 things you're grateful for. Knead the dough with your whole heart, pouring in your dreams for tomorrow. Let rise in a place touched by moonlight. I had maybe 2 cups of flour left in the tin canister Samuel had bought me for our 10th anniversary, barely enough for pancakes in the morning if I stretched them thin and served them with syrup made from sugar and water. Using it for bread meant the girls would have nothing for breakfast, would go to school with empty stomachs and the hollow-eyed look of children who'd learned not to expect too much from life. But something about the recipe pulled at me, the way gospel music had pulled at Samuel, irresistible and necessary and somehow larger than logic. I measured the flour, letting it run through my fingers like sand, like time, like hope made tangible. As I worked, I thought about gratitude, a hard thing to find when your stomach's empty and your future's uncertain, when bill collectors circle like vultures and landlords count your sorrows in dollars and cents. But Pearl's smile when she helped Charlotte with her reading, patient and kind despite her own exhaustion. The way she'd braided Viola's hair that morning, humming one of Samuel's favorite songs. Iris's fierce loyalty to her sisters, the way she'd step between them and the world's cruelty without hesitation. Charlotte's stubborn refusal to be ashamed of who we were, her chin lifted in defiance of anyone who looked down on us. Viola's unshakable faith that tomorrow would be better than today, that love was stronger than hardship. My daughters. My greatest wealth in a world that counted riches in dollars and cents. The dough came together under my hands, warm and alive and somehow more substantial than the sum of its simple parts. As I kneaded, I thought about dreams. Not the wild, impossible ones that led to heartbreak, but the quiet hopes that kept me breathing. A job that paid enough to keep us together without wearing my fingers to bone. A future where my girls could go to school without worry, could grow up to be more than their circumstances. A world where love mattered more than money, where being poor didn't mean being worthless. I covered the bowl with a clean dish towel and set it on the windowsill, where pale moonlight touched the cloth like a blessing. The light seemed different somehow, softer and more golden than the harsh electric street lamps below. I sat back down to wait, watching shadows move across the kitchen walls like dancers, like the spirits of all the women who'd come before me, who'd made miracles from scraps and hope from desperation. Somewhere around midnight, I dozed off in the chair, my head pillowed on my arms. I dreamed of Samuel, standing in a kitchen filled with golden light, his hands covered in flour. He was singing, one of those old spirituals his grandmother had taught him, about making a way out of no way, about rivers that had to be crossed and mountains that had to be moved. "You always were stronger than you knew, Essie," he said in the dream, his voice warm as summer honey. "Trust the recipe. Trust yourself." I woke to the most incredible smell. Not just bread, not just yeast and flour transformed by heat and time. This was the smell of Sunday mornings at Mama's house, of church suppers where every dish was made with love, of family gatherings where laughter was the main course and seconds were always encouraged. It was the smell of every good memory I'd ever had, wrapped up in a scent so rich it made my mouth water and my eyes fill with tears. The bowl on the windowsill had overflowed. What should have been a small loaf had somehow become enough dough for 3 full loaves, maybe 4. The towel could barely contain it, and pale, perfect dough spilled over the edges like abundance itself. I shaped the loaves quickly, my hands knowing what to do without my mind's guidance, muscle memory inherited from my mother and her mother before her. The rhythm was ancient, sacred, fold, turn, shape, smooth. The dough felt alive under my palms, warm and yielding and full of promise. I slipped the loaves into our temperamental oven, the one that had to be coaxed and threatened to maintain an even temperature. But tonight it seemed to cooperate, settling into a steady heat that felt like cooperation, like the universe deciding to work with me instead of against me. An hour later, I pulled out 3 perfect loaves of bread, their crusts golden brown and crackling with heat. The smell filled our tiny apartment like a blessing, rich and warm and impossible. Steam rose from the loaves like prayers made visible, like hope given form. "Mama?" Pearl appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair wrapped in a scarf, her face soft with sleep, but alert with concern. "What's that smell?" Before I could answer, the other girls emerged from their bedroom like flowers following sunlight. Even Iris, who'd grown suspicious of joy since Samuel died, smiled as the aroma wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Charlotte rubbed her eyes, confused but drawn by the promise of food. Viola clutched her doll and looked around with wonder, as if she'd awakened in a fairy tale. "Bread," I said simply, though the word felt inadequate for what had happened. But we didn't have enough flour, Charlotte said, always the practical one, always questioning, always trying to make sense of a world that rarely cooperated with logic. I looked at the cookbook, still open on the table, its pages glowing gold in the lamplight. The recipe for bread of new beginnings seemed to shimmer, the purple ink alive. Sometimes we have more than we think. I sliced the warm bread, watching steam rise from the golden interior. The first bite melted on my tongue like a prayer answered, soft and rich and full of something I'd almost forgotten how to name. The crust crackled between my teeth, and the bread itself was dense and satisfying, filled with a richness that came from more than flour and water. Hope. That's what it tasted like. Hope made edible, transformed into sustenance for bodies and souls alike. For the first time in months, my daughters laughed. Real laughter, not the careful, quiet sounds they'd learned to make so as not to disturb my grief. The sound bounced off our cracked walls and thin windows, bright as church bells on Easter morning, rich as the music Samuel used to make when he whistled while he worked. We ate until our bellies were full, until color returned to Viola's pale cheeks, and Pearl's shoulders relaxed from their perpetual hunch of responsibility. Charlotte told jokes between bites, her mouth full of bread and joy. Iris actually smiled, the real smile I hadn't seen in months, the one that transformed her sharp features into something radiant. There was still bread left over, enough for breakfast, enough to carry us through another day, enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, miracles were possible for people like us. As the girls returned to bed, whispering excitedly about the miracle bread, their voices full of wonder and possibility, I sat alone with the cookbook. I turned the page and found another recipe: soup of plenty. Below that, cookies of sweet dreams. And another, tea of comfort. Each recipe promised more than food. They promised transformation, hope, the kind of magic that grows not from tricks or spells, but from love poured out without reservation, from faith in the face of impossibility. I closed the book and pressed my palm against its leather cover. Warmth pulsed beneath my fingers, steady as a heartbeat, sure as sunrise, constant as a mother's love. The landlord would come for his rent. Tomorrow, the bill collectors would knock on our door with their demands and their threats. Tomorrow, the world would still be hard and sharp and unforgiving, full of people who measured worth in coins and saw poverty as failure. But tonight, my daughters slept with full bellies and dreams of better days. Tonight, our apartment smelled like hope instead of despair, like love instead of loss. Tonight, magic had visited our small corner of the world and left us changed. And tonight, I believed again, in miracles, in hope, in the power of love to transform even the humblest ingredients into something extraordinary. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but it would also bring new recipes, new possibilities, new chances to make something beautiful from whatever scraps the world left us. The cookbook lay open beside me, its pages full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and I knew that our story was just beginning.